Hello again, everybody. This is Craig Evans of Autism Hangout, and thank you for tuning into this Autism Hangout special report. Today's guest is someone you could easily call a typical all-American boy. David George grew up playing hockey and watching Starsky and Hutch and loving rock and roll. He even writes poetry. But with a relatively recent diagnosis of Asperger syndrome, David decided that his mission in life is to help the world understand that differences are good. Autism Hangout, please welcome author, motivational speaker, and autism advocate David George. Welcome, David. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm always fascinated about people that find out about their autism later on in life. How old are you now, and how recently did you get diagnosed?
Well, come tomorrow, or I should say, 2 weeks from tomorrow, I'll be 42. And it was just over 3 years ago when I was actually diagnosed with Asperger syndrome.
Okay. Did you notice that you didn't quite fit in prior to that time, or what was your rationale?
Well, I always felt that in many ways I fit in, but I guess once I was diagnosed with Asperger's, it started to make much more sense to me because toward the end of the criteria that represented the diagnosis, it said that I almost fit in on the most mainstream normal level with people, but when it comes to the most critical areas, I missed by inches. I was diagnosed with a severe learning disability before I attended Bethany College, and that was my ticket into the special education program, Bethany College in West Virginia, which became my saving grace, and I ended up doing very well there with my grade point in the B range. I pledged a Sigma Nu fraternity, and I ended up making the greatest friends of my life that were like brothers then. They're still like brothers to this day. Girls I went out with became like sisters to me, friends, and they became my family in lots of ways.
Yeah, and you were a communications major.
I was involved with the radio station more at Bethany, and I was a sports reporter and writer for the newspaper. But then worked in the radio field, and then I was and then I was in graduate school at both West Virginia University and Marshall University because psychology was another thing that I was interested in too.
Clearly, you are into lots of different things. By the way, I love the radio voice. I can see where you're successful at it. But I know that this diagnosis has changed your direction. I notice that this has pushed you to a certain understanding about people with differences. Can you comment on that a bit?
Well, again, having a disability of this caliber and magnitude, certainly it's compelled me to be much more empathic of people who struggle with things, whether they're learning disabilities or autism spectrum disorders. But I always knew I had a learning disability of some kind, and again, when I was finally in an appropriate environment, being Bethany College, I was able to accept myself more, and I was around people more socially because there are many persons with autism, especially if they have a mild and highly functional kind, that do want to be socially compatible. But and I am in many ways. But when it comes to multitasking and not being able to comprehend things at the pace of other people, that's where I would become sort of more withdrawn and sort of isolated. But there was the frustration of me saying to myself, look, I'm just like everybody else in lots of ways, which I am, but I do have limitations to be reckoned with at the same time. So it was a matter of me finding out, okay, what's most appropriate for me? Where is my niche, and how can I do things in such a way where I can be creative and useful and not be so detached from everybody at the same time.
As a motivational speaker, when you go on the road, what are your messages today?
Well, my messages are basically for everyone to challenge everyone to look deeper into human beings and see them more as unique individuals, including persons who don't have disabilities, but more particularly people who do have disabilities, whether they're learning challenges or autism spectrum disorders, and to understand and to see the more positive things about it, and to think in terms of what they can do as opposed to what they can't do, and not force them or push them away in where they feel like they're in virtual no man's land. I got into motivational speaking after the book was published, of course. The book is essentially the vehicle. But as I've talked to people and I've learned so much more about myself, it's given me not just greater insight, but even more confidence to communicate with people and to generate those ideas and make them more aware of the realities of people who live with these disabilities, because I personally think the ones who've lived with the disabilities might ironically be able to generate more insight in such a way where to the point where if they have the opportunities to go around and communicate with people on a regular basis, it's going to help, millions of people on a most profound level.
If you were to give somebody on the street a key piece of wisdom about why different is good, what would that key piece of wisdom be?
Well, again, I think that goes back to how people who've struggled with things and have been more isolated, but at the same time, if they've had the opportunity to communicate with other people that who do understand these things, chances are they're going to say, "Hey, this guy is unique," and this guy, and now that people are finally more aware of disabilities, especially autism, and I'm sure you know that just recently the Center for Disease Control said that 1 out of 88 persons has some level of autism. Well, I mean, that would be a key factor, but I would tell them that, the fact that some of these people have these difficulties, gives them so much more insight, and and then the more they can share these things with people, which is essentially what life is about anyway, the more you're going to generate a greater good for specific unique individuals and just everyone abroad.
Mm-hmm. Different is always good. Different is always better. David, how can people find out more information about your book?
Well, I have, right here, this is a copy of the book right here. Be unique, be you and live. Turn off the robot. You are human and unique. Be true to yourself and let others do the same. I sell the books independently now, and I have a website, and it's, I'll spell it out for you. Well, it's www.beyoundlive.com, and the price of the book, including tax, is $12.72, and there's a shipping handling charge of $3, so that would be $15.72 altogether. I do accept checks. At this point, I don't accept credit cards, but I sell my books independently, partly because it's a self-published book, and it makes it a little easier for me in that regard. And it's just that's just part of the reality of having a self-published book, at least, especially if you have autism and you're trying to do so many things at the same time, which multitasking for me is most definitely a challenge. But there's positive things about it, and that expression. If I don't want to say having autism gave me a lemon. If I had a lemon, it was because I was just in a very inappropriate environment where I was not getting the help I needed until I attended Bethany, and years later. But again, they say if you get a lemon, turn it into lemonade.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so your website is beyoundlive.com, and there's contact information there too if people want to hire you as a motivational speaker?
Yes, there is, and if somebody wants to send a check to me in the mail for the book and anything else, and there's a substantial amount of information, not just about the book, but even more specifically about the Asperger's and living with autism.
Very good. David, thanks for coming on today and telling us about your story.
Well, thank you for having me, Mr. Evans. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been my pleasure. And Autism Hangout, thank you for tuning in. I'll be back again soon with another special report.